My name is Maria Dolphin, and I'm about to turn 27. I've been married for 5 years and have a 4-year-old son named Martin. At first, I worked full-time, but now I work part-time at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. Kevin Carlton, who I married, seemed sweet when we were dating, but things changed after marriage. He became more controlling. Kevin has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, and he spoils her a lot, maybe because of their big age gap. Before we got married, I didn't really mind how close Jane and Kevin were. But after tying the knot, I started noticing some changes. Jane frequently drops by our place, and I end up scrambling to cater to her every whim because Kevin always caves into her demands. She shows up unannounced, morning or night, without bringing any gifts or even a thank you. She acts like I'm invisible, only talking to Kevin, saying, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Kevin, oblivious to the fact that I didn't prepare dinner for Jane, asks if she wants to eat. When I try to discreetly mention it to Kevin, he brushes it off, leaving me to serve my own dinner to Jane in the end. Then, loud enough for Jane to hear, he blames me, saying things like, "You should have made more food." Jane looks like she's going to cry and apologizes to me. Kevin comforts her and scolds me, saying things like, "You're not considerate," or "Don't be mean to my sister." Even though Jane apologizes, it's clear she feels reassured by how Kevin takes her side. It's like she enjoys it. I end up making my own meal from leftovers while they eat together. Just as I'm about to join them, Jane tells Kevin she wants to talk alone. Kevin moves me and Martin to another room. This isn't the first time. After we finish eating and clean up, I find them chatting on the sofa. They never bothered to clean up after themselves. It feels like they see me as a maid, not a wife or sister-in-law. They don't even talk to Martin. It's like I'm just a maid bringing my kid to work. I was tidying up the kitchen and getting ready to bathe Martin when Kevin suddenly called me, even though it was almost 8 p.m. He said, "Jane wants cake. Go buy it now. Get it from the shop by the station," telling me exactly where to go. But going out to buy cake would make Martin go to bed late. When I hesitated, Jane insisted, "I want it now," and Kevin rushed me, saying, "It's fine if he stays up a bit longer tonight." Then Kevin started yelling at me, blaming me for having an attitude with Jane around. I knew I'd have to go to the cake shop eventually, so I reluctantly agreed. There's a cake shop near the station that closes at 9 p.m. So if I hurry, I can make it. As I was getting ready to go, I overheard them talking, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. They were saying things like, "She's so thoughtless," and "Why did you marry her?" Since I couldn't leave Martin alone, I decided to take him with me. While I was getting Martin ready, I heard Kevin's loud voice from the living room. "If you defy me again, we'll get a divorce." Martin could hear it too. He might not understand the words, but I think he knows his parents are fighting. Trying to control my emotions, I asked Martin, "What kind of cake would you like?" He perked up and said, "Mom, I want a cake with lots of fruits." So on our way to the cake shop, we chatted about cakes, momentarily forgetting about Kevin's words. We made it to the cake shop just before it closed. Luckily, they had the cake Jane wanted. We bought 2 cakes and the fruit-loaded cake Martin desired. When we got back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin. I prepared Martin's cake and brought it to the dining room. As soon as I set it down in front of Martin, Jane pointed at it and said, "Actually, I want that cake." Before I could respond, Kevin moved Martin's cake in front of Jane. Ignoring Martin's protests, Jane started eating his cake. Kevin justified it by saying, "I bought that cake with my money, so I get to choose." Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I expressed my frustration to Kevin and Jane. Kevin then threatened, "We could get a divorce, you know." Martin stopped crying but held my hand tightly, looking worried. Then, after a moment, Martin said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries. It's really yummy." He mentioned it while eating the cake that Jane initially wanted. I feel like I'm putting Martin through too much. 3 adults, myself included, shouldn't be subjecting a 4-year-old child to this. When I saw Jane reaching for Martin's cake, I swiftly moved his plate away. Martin happily followed me to another room, saying, "Yummy, let's go over here." Probably Kevin noticed Jane's attempt too. He apologized to her, saying, "Sorry for being so tight-fisted." I wanted to respond, but I held back, not wanting to expose Martin to the word divorce. Seeing Martin innocently enjoying his cake is heartwarming. After he finished, ignoring Kevin and Jane, We decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Jane had already left. I was about to wake up Kevin and Martin and make breakfast when I heard Martin crying. I rushed to him to find his piggy bank, a gift from my father, broken, and all his saved money gone. It was Martin's nightly ritual to bid goodnight to his piggy bank before going to sleep. Last night was no exception. He said goodnight to it and cuddled up with me. At that time, only Kevin and Jane were in the living room. I asked Kevin about the piggy bank. He responded casually, saying that Jane needed some money, so she took it from Martin's piggy bank. Martin was still crying as I held him close. His pain was so palpable that it brought tears to my eyes. It was agonizing to see Kevin prioritize and cater to his sister Jane over our son Martin. Anger and sadness flooded over me simultaneously. "Why are you making a morning so miserable?" Kevin retorted. "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much." For the first time since we got married, I let my anger out towards him. I had always avoided arguing in front of Martin, but I couldn't stay silent seeing him so hurt. Kevin looked at me intensely, then went to the bedroom without saying a word, returning with something in his hand. To my shock, Kevin handed me divorce papers, something I didn't even know he had stashed away. "If you're not happy with me, then let's get a divorce," he declared, thrusting the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud slam of the door. Martin, who had never shed tears over the issues with Kevin and Jane, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He had been crying since last night, and it broke my heart to see him in such pain. "Hey Martin, how about we skip daycare today?" I suggested, hoping to bring him some comfort. He eagerly agreed with a loud yes, flashing me a faint smile. As Martin brought a picture book from the shelf and settled onto my lap, he looked up at me with joy and asked, "Today, Mama is the teacher at daycare, right?" His innocence was like a ray of sunshine. I couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Today, I decided that we would spend the day playing and cherishing each moment together to fill his heart with happiness. I might be causing some inconvenience at work, but when I explained the situation, they kindly granted me a day off, advising me to spend quality time with Martin. In the morning, we headed to the park, played games like hide and seek, and had a blast on the swings and slides. Upon returning home for lunch, Martin seemed tired and soon dozed off on my lap, just like he used to when he was a baby. Normally, I would use this time to catch up on chores. But today felt different, so I decided to cherish the moment and enjoy watching him sleep peacefully. As I started to drift off myself, I was startled by a noise from the front door. It was too early for Kevin to be back, so I felt uneasy. Quickly, I scooped up Martin, and grabbing only my bag with essentials, I hurriedly hid with him in the bedroom closet. I froze as I sensed someone entering the house, holding my breath as I heard a familiar voice. The person seemed to be searching for something, muttering, "I can't find it." Where did the wife hide it? Fear gripped me as I listened to the sound of rummaging, but as I focused on the voice, I recognized it. It was Jane. Questions flooded my mind. Why did she have a key? What was she searching for? I cautiously cracked open the closet door to see what she was up to. She was rifling through drawers and cabinets, then let out a frustrated sigh before making a phone call. "I searched where you said, but it's not there." "Yeah, I checked there too. If it's not there, it's a waste of time." "Okay, got it. Heading home now," she said, mentioning Kevin's name. Kevin? I wondered what they were searching for. I heard the front door lock, and when it was safe, I put Martin to bed and pondered the strange events. I was certain Kevin was involved in whatever they were looking for. If they were searching for something unknown, could it be one of my possessions? Despite their earlier conversation, I couldn't decipher why Jane had suddenly appeared at our house. Kevin felt like a stranger to me, and I was overcome with a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Hastily, I packed the essentials for Martin and myself. By the time Martin woke from his nap, I was ready to leave. "Martin, let's go to Grandpa's house," I said, and we made our way to the station, catching a train to my parents' home. Thankfully, it was just 2 stops away, so we arrived swiftly. Since I hadn't informed them beforehand, my parents were surprised, but they sensed something was wrong and welcomed us without prying. Their dog, a favorite of Martin's, greeted him eagerly, and they began playing together. Watching them, I felt a sense of relief and proceeded to recount everything that had happened with Kevin and Jane. "Perhaps Jane was searching for your bank cards," my mother suggested. It made sense. Before getting married, I had founded a successful online shop for handmade goods with friends. As the CEO of the handmade industry, I gained recognition, but when the shop flourished, I decided to focus on raising my child. I've entrusted my company to trusted friends while I focus on raising my child. I work part-time and handle most tasks from home. Though I'm still the CEO, Kevin is unaware of this. He knows about my previous role and likely suspects I have savings. I've informed him that I receive assistance from the company but left out the CEO details, letting him assume I stepped down. I haven't disclosed the full extent of my CEO position or savings to Kevin for a reason. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered his poor money management skills. He spends everything he earns. He allocates only $200 monthly for food expenses and suggested I quit my job to be a full-time housewife. An idea I never agreed to, given the financial strain of such a small allowance. After some persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to let me work part-time at my current company. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he even had me sign a post-marital property waiver with a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I've been allotted only $200 for food expenses. Consequently, I've been using my savings to cover Martin's nursery fees and clothing expenses. I've refrained from asking Kevin for money beyond the food budget, leading him to assume I have substantial savings. Jane appears to be in dire need of money, and with Kevin's belief in my savings, they may be searching for my cash cards. It all makes sense now. I maintain a separate savings account dedicated to slowly accumulating funds for Martin's future. A portion of my salary is automatically deposited into this account each month. Given their financial circumstances, it's highly likely they are seeking my cash cards. No matter how hard Jane or Kevin search, they won't find my valuables because I always keep them close, including my cash cards. However, there's still an unresolved issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, possibly with Kevin's knowledge. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables in my parents' safe. Why are they so desperate for money? As I pondered this question, Martin tearfully approached my father, explaining that his piggy bank had been broken, and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father's face flushed with anger upon hearing Martin's story. "I'll call Kevin and talk to him," my mother suggested. While chiding my father, "Let's find out their motives." She reasoned that since Kevin had mentioned divorce, he might try to blame us and make the divorce more favorable for himself. Therefore, it's essential to calmly uncover their motives now to prevent them from escaping with excuses later on. I decided to secretly record their conversation to uncover their motives. My parents suggested consulting a lawyer who was a longtime family friend. Once back home, I started cooking dinner as usual when Kevin returned. I discreetly began recording on my phone, keeping the screen face down to avoid detection. To my surprise, Kevin immediately asked me where I kept my cash cards. When I questioned his sudden interest, he provided vague answers, attempting to deceive me. Remaining silent, I watched as Kevin's demeanor shifted to one of numbness and sadness. "Give me all your part-time earnings for my sister," he demanded, but I refused, explaining that the money was for Martin's savings. This enraged Kevin, who then angrily pushed divorce papers toward me from his bag. "You're relying on my money, so don't defy me," he retorted, dismissing the importance of saving for Martin. His words implied a greater value placed on Jane over Martin, leaving me stunned and disheartened. Upon hearing Kevin's words, I halted my meal preparations, calmly placed the divorce papers into the bag I had prepared earlier, and grasped Martin's hand, leading him to the door. Kevin's voice boomed behind us, declaring, "I'm serious about the divorce. Don't ever return." In response, I asserted, "I won't return to a home where anyone can come and go as they please," before departing. Was it too harsh to label my sister-in-law as a stranger? Following my departure, I was bombarded with messages and calls from Kevin, all of which I chose to ignore. I powered off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I played the recording of Kevin's conversation and showed them the completed divorce papers. My parents simply advised, "Do as you see fit." I didn't harbor any love or affection for Kevin, but I still cared deeply for Martin. Some advised me to divorce Kevin to spare Martin's feelings, but I feared that divorcing could also hurt Martin. Amidst this inner turmoil, Martin voiced his hunger, prompting my mother to whip up his favorite dish, hamburgers. Tears welled up in my eyes as my mother, with a gentle smile, said to Martin, "I made these hamburgers so you and Mom can visit us anytime." After taking a bite, Martin beamed and exclaimed, "Grandma's hamburgers are the best. I want them every day," his joyful words tugging on heartstrings. I replied, "It's because these hamburgers are made with all the love I have for you," as he sweetly fed me a bite. Overwhelmed by his kindness, tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. I tried to suppress them, but they kept flowing. My father reassured Martin, who was alarmed by my tears, saying, "Mommy is crying because she's so happy you gave her this hamburger. These are tears of joy, not sadness," he explained tenderly. Martin, in his innocence, remarked, "This hamburger is so yummy. If Jane were here, she'd love it too." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I embraced him tightly, while my father's eyes filled with emotion. Turning to Martin, I said, "Being with family is a blessing, isn't it?" He looked puzzled and asked, "Didn't Dad say only Jane is family? Is my family just Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma?" My father responded gently, "Yes, that's right," then asked Martin, "Would you like to stay here with us as family?" Martin chuckled and replied, "Of course. We're family," bringing smiles to everyone's faces. When was the last time we had such a natural meal? When did we last enjoy a meal filled with endless laughter and conversation? Despite contemplating divorce, the happiness of this meal persuaded me to finally part ways with Kevin. I planned to break the news to Martin, though the thought weighed heavily on my heart. Surprisingly, Martin seemed to understand and embrace the idea of divorce, expressing, "We'll still be a family." He happily cuddled our pet dog, affectionately referring to him as his little brother, despite the dog being older. With resolve, I began preparations for the divorce. Firstly, I promptly contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father, arranging to meet the following day. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, their faint laughter bringing me comfort as I lay in bed with my mother, reminiscing about my childhood. The next morning, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 missed calls and messages from Kevin, reflecting his emotional turmoil. Just the sight of it drained me, prompting me to switch off my phone once more. Today, I met with the lawyer, discussing the details and confirming my decision to divorce. We finalized the paperwork, and the lawyer will meet with Kevin tomorrow to proceed. After some time, the lawyer visited my parents' house to discuss the situation. It turned out that Jane had accrued a substantial debt from gambling and excessive shopping, with Kevin serving as her guarantor. When Jane couldn't make the repayments, they devised a plan to tap into my savings. Now, Kevin wants me and Martin back and is retracting his desire for a divorce, the lawyer explained. However, the divorce papers I had submitted earlier had already been processed. When asked if this meant the divorce was finalized, the lawyer confirmed it, stating, "Yes, it's been accepted." Kevin appeared to break down, expressing his fear of losing me to another man. Despite his emotional plea, knowing that everything was settled brought me a sense of peace. I anticipated arguments over child support, but Kevin even pledged to pay $340 to support Martin every month. Later, Kevin called me. Feeling relieved after the divorce proceedings, I decided to speak with him briefly. His tone was no longer aggressive. Instead, he spoke calmly. He confessed that he believed keeping me financially dependent would prevent me from seeking a divorce. He also acknowledged his tendency to spoil his younger sister, Jane, as a misguided form of sibling love. He admitted feeling jealous of Martin, fearing he had lost me to our son. "Once I've resolved Jane's debts, I'll come back for you. Please don't remarry until then," he pleaded. However, I firmly reiterated that I no longer loved him and wouldn't reconsider our relationship. Before hanging up, I could hear him sobbing softly as he whispered, "Please be happy. Did I manage to stay strong until the end?" Discussing future plans with my parents, I decided to remain at their house until Martin grows up, and he transferred to a different nursery. Returning to my role as company president, I explained the situation to my colleagues. Later, I learned that Kevin and Jane had disclosed the divorce and their debt to their parents, resulting in their disownement. More than the financial issues, their parents were incensed about never seeing their grandson again. Now, Kevin and Jane, once close, reside in a modest apartment, constantly blaming each other. Their actions have led to their own downfall. Today, I find happiness in being with my family.
My name is Lena. I'm sitting here, my laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank page. I'm a writer, known for thrillers that keep readers up at night. But today, I'm not writing fiction. I'm writing about me, about where I come from. It's not a pretty story, but it's mine. My mom, Claire Valmont, was a big deal in the TV world. Beautiful, charming, the kind of woman who lit up a room. I remember watching her on TV, admiring how everyone seemed to love her. But that was just one side of her. When I was a kid, I never really understood why I had to live so differently. Born with a hair lip, I had surgery as a baby. But to Mom, I was a mistake, something to hide. "We can't let people see you like this," she'd say, her voice cold, as she adjusted the medical mask on my face. "You understand, right? It's for your own good." I grew up in a big house, but it felt like a prison. I was always alone, except for the nanny, Mrs. Jenkins. She was kind but scared of Mom. Everyone was. One day, I heard Mom talking on the phone. "Yes, she's always sick. Poor thing. It's a severe immune disease," she lied so effortlessly. I knew then that she was ashamed of me, that she saw me as a burden. My dad? He wasn't around much after the divorce. I heard he was living it up with his new family. I used to imagine him coming to rescue me, but he never did. I didn't go to school like other kids. A tutor came home to teach me. "Keep your mask on," she'd remind me, just like Mom. I turned 10 that year. I was sitting in my room, my only sanctuary, when Mom walked in. She looked at me, her expression hard to read. "Mom, if you hate me so much, why don't you just send me to Dad?" I asked. I needed to know, even if it hurt. She laughed, a harsh, cold sound. "And let the world think I abandoned my sick child? No, we can't have that. Better they think I'm a saint, caring for her ailing daughter." That night, I cried myself to sleep. I was just a prop in her perfect world, a secret she was desperate to keep. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be a secret forever. I often think about how different my life was from other kids. There I was, cooped up in my room, a mask covering half my face, while they were probably out playing, laughing, living. My world was small, confined to the walls of my room, my imagination the only place I could be free. Every morning started the same. I'd wake up to the muffled sounds of the house, slip on the mask that had become my unwanted companion, and sit down for breakfast. Mrs. Jenkins, our housekeeper and my nanny, would bring it in, her face always wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear," she'd say, setting down my tray. "Your mother left early for a shoot. She said to remind you to keep your mask on." I nodded, used to the routine. It was always like this. Mom was either absent, busy with her glamorous life, or when she was home, I was just a problem she had to deal with. Some days, I'd try to talk to Mrs. Jenkins to get some glimpse of the outside world. "What's it like out there, Mrs. Jenkins? Are the flowers blooming?" She'd pause, a sigh escaping her. "Yes, the garden is lovely. I wish you could see it." But wishes were useless in my world. As I grew older, the isolation ate at me. I watched TV, saw other kids my age doing normal things, and it burned. I wanted that. I wanted to be normal. But Mom's voice would always echo in my head, "Normal? You'll never be normal." Sometimes, I'd rebel, in small ways. One day, I left my room, mask off, just to feel a moment of freedom. Mom caught me, her face twisting in anger. "What are you doing? Do you want the whole world to see you like this?" she yelled. Her words were like slaps, each one stinging more than the last. "I just wanted some air," I stammered. "Air? You have a window. Use it," she snapped, pushing me back into my room. "You're grounded. No TV for a week." That night, I lay in bed, feeling the weight of the world on me. I was her secret, her shame. She didn't see me as a daughter, just a mistake she had to hide. My only solace was my writing. I poured my heart into those pages, creating stories where I was brave, strong, loved. Writing was my voice when I had none. One evening, Mrs. Jenkins found me scribbling furiously. She watched me for a moment, then said softly, "You know, you're quite good at that. Maybe one day, you'll be a writer." I looked up, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so," she said, a rare firmness in her voice. "You've got talent, and more importantly, you've got something to say." That stuck with me, gave me a glimmer of hope in my dreary world. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made me want more, made me dream of a life where I wasn't just the girl behind the mask. I started to imagine what it would be like to leave this place, to find a world where I wasn't just a shadow. Sometimes life throws you a lifeline when you're drowning in despair. That's what happened to me one dreary Tuesday, a day that felt as gray as my thoughts. Everything changed with a phone call. The phone, an old relic, hardly ever rang, so when it did, it jolted me. Mrs. Jenkins answered, her face turning pale as she listened. Then she came to me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's your father." My father, the man who had become more a figment of my imagination than a real person over the years, was on the line. I felt a mix of excitement and fear gripping me as I took the phone. "Hey, Lena," his voice was unexpectedly warm. I saw your mother's show. She said you were dying." I closed my eyes, a wave of emotions washing over me. That show. I had watched it too, hidden away in my room. Mom, tears in her eyes, telling the world her daughter was on the brink of death. It was a performance worthy of an award. And it was all lies. "I'm not dying, Dad. I'm right here," I said, my voice a mix of anger and relief. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sorry for everything. I want to make things right. How about you come live with me?" The offer was like a ray of sunlight in my dark world. Leave? Could I actually leave this house of lies and pretend love? "Yes," I said quickly, without a second thought. "I want to come." The days that followed were a whirlwind. My father came to get me, a man aged by time but still recognizable as the dad I remembered. Beside him was Linda, his new wife, her smile warm and inviting. "We're here for you," she said, her words simple but sincere. It felt like a promise. Mom watched from the doorway as I left, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word, didn't try to stop me. I looked back once, hoping for something, a sign of regret maybe, but she had already turned away, retreating back into her perfect, false world. Living with Dad and Linda was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. For the first time in forever, I didn't have to wear the mask. I could just be myself, though I was still figuring out who that was. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a concept still foreign to me, Linda asked, "What do you enjoy doing?" "You know, for fun." I hesitated, unaccustomed to anyone taking an interest in me. "I write," I said eventually. "Stories." "That's wonderful." Linda's eyes lit up. "You should share them with us sometime." In that moment, a seed of hope was planted in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a place in this new world, a world where I was more than just a secret to be hidden away. Stepping into life with Dad and Linda was like walking into a different world, one where I felt like I belonged, like I was part of a real family, not a facade built on lies. One evening, Dad sat me down. There was a look in his eyes, a mix of concern and hope. "We've been thinking," he began cautiously, "about getting you the best care, to help you move forward." I instinctively tensed up at the mention of doctors. "I'm tired of doctors," I replied, the words coming out sharper than I intended. He nodded, understanding my apprehension. "It's not just about appearances. It's about healing, inside and out. We want you to be happy, truly happy." Linda added softly, "You've been through so much. It's time you had a chance to heal completely." Their words sank in, and I agreed to it. We found a top-notch clinic, and the surgeon there, Dr. Avery, was different from any I'd encountered. He didn't just see a patient, he saw a person. The day before the surgery, he said to me, "Remember, this isn't about changing who you are. It's about helping you see yourself in a new light." The surgery was more successful than I could have hoped. For the first time, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't feel disgust. I saw a reflection that surprised me. I even bore a resemblance to my mother, her beauty that I never thought I could share. But it wasn't just about the physical change. The real journey was the therapy that followed with Dr. Klein. It was about untangling the web of emotions and scars inside me. In one session, I found myself breaking down. "I'm just so angry," I confessed, tears streaming down my face. Angry at my mom, at the world, at myself. Dr. Klein handed me a tissue, her gaze steady. "It's okay to feel angry. But remember, you also have the power to let go of that anger, in your own time." It was a long, tough climb, but slowly, I started to feel a shift inside me. The anger began to ebb away, replaced by something calmer, more like peace or perhaps acceptance. As the days passed, Linda noticed the change. "You're smiling more," she remarked one evening, a note of happiness in her voice. I touched my face, almost in wonder. "Yeah, I guess I am. It feels right." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like the author of my own story. Not defined by my past, my scars, or my mother's shadow, but by my own strength and resilience. I started writing thrillers under a pseudonym, pouring every ounce of my tumultuous past into them. As I healed and grew, so did my stories. They became more mature, more gripping. By the time I was 28, I was a successful author, my books flying off the shelves. But despite my success, I always kept my true identity a closely guarded secret. Then, out of nowhere, the past called me. Literally. I was at home, scribbling notes for my next book, when the phone rang. Dad answered and, after a brief conversation, his face clouded with confusion. "It's for you," he said, handing me the phone. Something about a TV show. I took the phone, my heart skipping a beat. "Hello?" "Hi, is this Lena Holmes?" a chirpy voice asked. "I'm calling from Straight Talk, hosted by Claire Valmont. We're huge fans of your work and would love to have you on the show." Claire Valmont. My mother. The words hit me like a wave, leaving me momentarily speechless. I'll think about it," I managed to stammer out. After hanging up, I turned to Dad and Linda, who were both looking at me with concern. It was Mom's show. They want me as a guest. Linda's eyes widened. "Oh, my. Are you okay?" I nodded, a plan slowly forming in my mind. "I'm more than okay. I think it's time to face her. To show her, and everyone else, who I really am." Dad looked worried. "Are you sure? That's a big step." I felt a surge of determination. I've never been more sure of anything. It's time she knew the truth. So, I called them back and agreed to go on the show. As the day approached, my nerves were a tangled mess, but underneath it all was a steady current of resolve. I was ready to take back my story. The day of the show, Linda hugged me tightly before I left. "You're brave and strong," she said, her voice full of pride. "Remember that, no matter what happens." The studio was a frenzy of activity, lights, and cameras everywhere. And there she was, Claire Valmont, as poised and charismatic as ever. She hadn't seen me yet. A producer approached me, all smiles. "Ready to meet Claire? She's excited to have the mysterious author of The Wolf Trap on her show." I nodded, feeling an odd sense of calm. "Yes, I'm ready." As I walked onto the set, my mother turned, her professional smile in place. Then her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty. "Welcome," she said, recovering quickly. We're all eager to hear about your thrilling novels. Where do you find your inspiration? I looked into the camera, then back at her. Well, I began, my voice steady. Let's just say my childhood was quite eventful. The air was thick with unspoken words, the tension palpable. This was it. My moment of truth. Sitting across from my mother on live TV, my heart was pounding, but my voice was calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment to confront the ghost of my past. So, my mother started, her TV smile flawless. Your books have been a huge success. What's the secret to creating such spine-tingling stories? I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded. Truth is often stranger than fiction, I said, my voice even. My books, they're drawn from real experiences, real pain. Her smile faltered for a second. Real experiences? How intriguing. Can you give us an example? I took a deep breath. Well, let's start with a girl who was hidden away from the world because of her appearance. A girl who was told she was a burden, an embarrassment. The color drained from her face, her professional mask beginning to crack. I see. That's quite a dark inspiration. I didn't back down. Yes, it is. That girl was me, Claire. And you are the mother who hid her away. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. My mother's face was a picture of shock and disbelief. What are you saying? She stammered. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, I replied firmly. You're Claire Valmont, the woman who told the world her daughter was dying, just to gain sympathy. The woman who locked her daughter away because she couldn't bear the thought of having a child that wasn't perfect. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked around, as if seeking an escape. The producer tried to intervene. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, I cut in, turning to the camera. There's no misunderstanding. For years, I lived in a shadow, hidden away, my very existence denied. But not anymore. I could see the panic in my mother's eyes now. She was losing control of the narrative, the perfect image she had crafted for herself. This is absurd, she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. You're making this up. Why would I do such things? Because to you, image was everything. And I didn't fit that image, I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. But I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I'm here to tell my story, the real story. The show cut to a break, the tension in the studio palpable. My mother was speechless, her facade shattered. For the first time, I felt like I was in control, no longer a victim of her lies and manipulation. The aftermath of the TV show was like a storm that had been brewing for years, finally breaking. The media went into a frenzy. My phone was ringing off the hook, journalists clamoring for more of my story. And through it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, no longer a burden I carried alone. The next day, Dad and Linda were glued to the TV, watching the news coverage. You've started quite the firestorm, Dad said, his voice a mix of concern and admiration. Linda nodded, her eyes on the screen. But you did what you needed to do. We're proud of you. I sat with them, watching as my mother's once flawless image was picked apart. There were debates, discussions, people expressing shock and sympathy. Then, the phone rang. It was the TV network. I answered, bracing myself. We've never seen a reaction like this, the voice on the other end said, a bit frantic. Your mother, she's been suspended. The show's on hold. I let out a slow breath. I see. After hanging up, I turned to Dad and Linda. They've suspended her. The show's on hold. Dad shook his head. I never thought it would come to this. I didn't either, I admitted. But maybe now she'll understand the impact of her actions. The days that followed were a whirlwind. My story was everywhere. People were talking, not just about the scandal, but about my books, my journey. I was invited to interviews, podcasts, book signings. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. One night, Linda sat down with me, a serious look on her face. "Are you okay with all of this, Lena? It's a lot to handle." I thought about it. I am. It's like I've finally taken control of my own narrative. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help someone else out there who's going through their own struggle. As the dust settled, my mother's career took a hit. She became reclusive, shying away from the public eye. It wasn't my intention to ruin her, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Dad hugged me one evening, a bit of sadness in his eyes. "You did what you had to do. And we're here for you, no matter what." "Yeah," I said, feeling a sense of closure. It's time to move forward, to keep writing my story, but on my own terms. After the whirlwind of the confrontation and its fallout, life started to settle into a new kind of normal. I was busier than ever, with book signings and interviews, but there was a sense of peace within me that I had never felt before. I was no longer hiding, no longer a secret. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with Dad and Linda, the sun setting in a blaze of colors. Dad broke the silence. "You know, Lena, I never imagined things turning out this way. But I'm glad they did. You've come so far." Linda nodded, taking my hand. "You're an inspiration, not just to us, but to so many out there." I smiled, feeling a warm glow in my heart. "Thanks. It feels good to finally be myself, to not be afraid of the truth." We talked about the future, about my next book. I was already working on it, pouring my newfound sense of self into the pages. It was more than just a thriller, it was a story of triumph, of overcoming the odds. The next day, I met with my editor, a no-nonsense woman who had always believed in me. "Your story, it's powerful," she said, her eyes scanning the manuscript. "It's going to resonate with a lot of people." I felt a surge of pride. I hope so. It's the most honest thing I've ever written. As the days passed, I found a new rhythm, a balance between my public persona and my personal life. I was still writing, still sharing my story, but I also took time for myself, for Dad and Linda, for the life we had built together. One afternoon, I sat down to write in my journal, a habit I had maintained since I was a child. It was a moment of reflection, of looking back and looking forward. I wrote about the journey, about the pain and the triumph, about the love and support I had found. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of contentment. My past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was more than the girl in the mask, more than the daughter of Claire Valmont. I was a writer, a survivor, a woman who had found her voice. As I looked out the window, I realized that this was just the beginning. There were more stories to tell, more chapters to write in my life. And I was ready for whatever came next.
I'm Ava, a 29-year-old stay-at-home mom living in a cozy house I inherited from my grandma. It's not just any house, it's a piece of my childhood filled with memories of baking cookies with grandma and playing hide and seek in its spacious rooms. Now, it's home to my own little family. My husband, Mark, a hardworking manager, and our 2-year-old sunshine Lily. Life sounds picture perfect, right? Well, it's not. The problem starts right next door, where Mark's parents, Helen and Frank, live. Our relationship, let's just say it's like mixing oil and water. "Mommy, more juice!" Lily's voice cuts through my thoughts. I pour her some juice, glancing at the clock. Almost 5 p.m. Time for the daily invasion. As if on cue, the door swings open. "Ava, we're here!" "What's for dinner?" Helen announces, with Frank shuffling in behind her. "Hi, Helen. Frank? I've made a casserole, but it's just enough for Mark, Lily, and me," I reply, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank frowns. "What do you mean, just enough?" You know we come over for dinner? Helen chimes in, her tone sharp. You're at home all day, Ava. Is it too much to ask for a decent meal? I take a deep breath, feeling the frustration bubble up. I have my hands full with Lily, and cooking for 4 is a bit much every day. Mark walks in, tired from work. What's going on here? Your wife doesn't want to cook for us, Frank says, his voice raising. Mark looks at me, then at his parents, and sighs. Can't you just make a bit more, Ava? My frustration peaks. It's not about the amount, Mark. It's about respect and boundaries. Helen scoffs. Boundaries. We're family. Lily, sensing the tension, tugs at my dress. Mommy, I'm hungry. I kneel to her level. Let's get you seated, sweetie. Dinner is a tense affair. Mark's parents eat the sandwiches they brought, throwing disapproving glances my way. The TV blares in the background. Lily's fidgeting in her chair, and I'm trying not to crumble under the weight of this daily chaos. After they leave, Mark sits on the sofa, absorbed in his phone. We need to talk about this, I say, standing in front of him. He doesn't look up. Not now, Ava. I'm tired. And just like that, I'm left alone in the kitchen, cleaning up the mess, both literally and metaphorically. This is my life, a constant battle of wills, with me on one side and the world on the other. Life has a funny way of testing you, and mine's turning into a daily pop quiz with no right answers. I'm Ava, still juggling motherhood, a marriage that's running on autopilot, and in-laws who've mistaken my home for a free-for-all diner. It's another morning in our house, and I've made a decision. Today, I'm cooking only for 3, me, Mark, and our little Lily. Let's see how this goes. Lily's in her high chair, happily smearing oatmeal on her face when Helen and Frank barge in, just like clockwork. Morning, Ava. What's for breakfast? Helen asks, a bit too cheerily. I take a deep breath. Morning. I've only made enough for Lily and me today. Frank's face turns red. What do you mean? Are we supposed to starve? No, you're supposed to take care of your meals, I reply, trying to keep my voice calm. Helen's eyes narrow. This is ridiculous, Ava. We are family. You can't just... I cut her off. I can, and I did. I have enough on my plate with Lily and the house. Mark comes in, rubbing his eyes. Why's everyone shouting so early? Your wife refuses to cook for us, Frank's voice booms. Mark looks at me, then at his parents, and says, Ava, why are you making things difficult? Difficult? I almost laugh. Mark, I'm not a 24/7 restaurant. I need help, not more mouths to feed. Mark doesn't say anything, just grabs a piece of toast and leaves for work. The day drags on. I can feel the tension thickening in the air. Dinner time rolls around, and I've stuck to my guns. Dinner for 3. Helen and Frank show up, each holding a sandwich. They sit down, unwrapping their food with exaggerated slowness. The TV's volume goes up, and up, until it's like we're at a rock concert. Lily's rubbing her eyes, clearly struggling to stay awake amidst the noise. Could you turn that down? Lily's trying to sleep, I ask, my patience wearing thin. Frank grunts. We can't hear it if it's any lower. Helen adds, you shouldn't be so uptight, Ava. It's just TV. It's not just TV. It's my home turning into a battleground, and I'm losing. Lily starts to cry, and I scoop her up, escaping to the quiet of her room. Later, Mark comes home to find his parents still there. The living room, a mess. Lily asleep in my arms. What happened here? He asks, looking around. I'm too tired for another round of arguments. Just the usual, I say, my voice flat. He doesn't push it, and neither do I, but inside, I feel something shift. I'm at my breaking point, and something's got to give. Every day feels like walking on eggshells in my own house. I'm Ava, still trying to find a balance between being a mom, a wife, and now, apparently, an unwelcome host to my in-laws. But today, it's not the in-laws that shake my world, it's Mark. It's late evening. Lily's finally asleep after what felt like hours of soothing. I'm clearing up the toys when Mark walks in, looking like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Ava, we need to talk," he says, avoiding eye contact. I sit down, bracing myself. "What is it, Mark?" He takes a deep breath. "I made a mistake with our finances. I invested in something and it didn't pan out." I feel a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? How bad is it?" "It's bad, really bad. I've lost a lot, like $100,000. My heart stops. 100,000? How could you do that without telling me?" Mark runs his hands through his hair, looking anywhere but at me. "I thought I could make it big, you know? Fix everything." "Fix what? We were fine. I can barely keep the tremor out of my voice." He finally looks at me, his eyes pleading. I know, but now we need a plan." "A plan?" I echo, feeling numb. "Yeah, I was thinking, maybe we could move my parents into our house, rent out their place to cover the debts." My mind races. His parents in our house? Full time. The very thought makes me feel like I'm suffocating. "Mark, are you serious? After everything with your parents, you want them here in our house all the time?" He sighs. "I know it's not ideal, but we don't have many options, Ava." I stand up, anger and disbelief swirling inside me. "Not ideal. It's a nightmare, Mark. And you just decided all of this without even talking to me?" He stands too, his voice rising. "What was I supposed to do, Ava? I'm trying to fix this." "By making my life a living hell," I shoot back. There's a silence, heavy and suffocating. "Finally, I speak," my voice barely a whisper. "Fine, move them in. But this is on you, Mark?" He nods, looking relieved and guilty all at once, but all I feel is a deep, sinking dread. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about trust, and I'm not sure how we come back from this. The day my in-laws moved in, it wasn't just their suitcases that entered our home. It was a tidal wave of chaos. Right from the start, it's clear that Helen and Frank are here to stay, and they have their own ideas about how things should be. "Frank, put that box in the living room and careful with it." Helen's voice echoes through the hallway as she directs her husband with military precision. I watch, holding Lily, who clings to me, wide-eyed at the commotion. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, Helen turns to me, "Ava, we need to talk about rearranging the house. We need space for our things." I feel a knot in my stomach. "Rearranging, Helen? There's not much space to work with." She waves her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Let's start with Lily's playroom. She can play in her bedroom, right?" I'm taken aback. "That's her space, Helen. She loves it there." Frank, carrying a heavy box, chimes in. "Kid won't mind, Ava. Don't make a fuss." Lily buries her face in my neck, and I realize this is just the beginning. The days that follow are a blur of unwelcome changes. Helen and Frank unpack their belongings, turning the living room into their personal space. They replace my tasteful decor with their old-fashioned knacks, and the TV blares day and night with their favorite shows. I try to cook dinner one evening, with Lily tugging at my apron. Frank strolls in, eyeing the pots on the stove. "What's this?" "Another one of your experimental dishes." I bite my tongue. It's a new recipe, Frank. If it's not to your liking, feel free to make something yourself. He laughs. In my day, women knew how to cook for their families. I feel a flash of anger, but before I can respond, Mark enters, looking weary. Can't we have one peaceful meal? I turn to him, my patience wearing thin. Peaceful? Mark, your parents have turned our home upside down. He avoids my gaze, grabbing a beer and retreating to the now occupied living room. Weeks pass, and the tension only grows. Helen has opinions on everything, from how I raise Lily to how I should manage the house. Frank, meanwhile, has taken to criticizing my cooking at every meal. One afternoon, I'm folding laundry when Helen walks in. Ava, these sheets aren't folded properly. Let me show you how it's done. I set my jaw. Thanks, Helen, but I've been folding sheets my whole life. She tuts, clearly not the right way. As she refolds the sheets, I feel a sense of helplessness. My own home no longer feels like mine. Night falls and I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The muffled sounds of the TV and my in-laws' laughter seep through the walls. Lily is asleep, but rest eludes me. I think back to the days when this house was filled with love and laughter, a stark contrast to the present. It feels like I'm losing a part of myself, bit by bit, as each day passes. Mark's side of the bed is empty. He's been spending more and more time working late. I'm left alone, wondering how things got this bad, and what, if anything, I can do to take back control of my life and my home. In a house that once felt like mine, I'm Ava, now a spectator in my own life. With my in-laws' takeover and Mark's growing distance, I'm left grappling with suspicions that refuse to settle. One afternoon, while Lily naps and the house is momentarily quiet, I call my brother, Jake. He's always been the one I turn to in tough times. Hey, Jake, I say, trying to sound casual. Ava, how's it going? Haven't heard from you in a while. I take a deep breath. Not great, Jake. I'm worried about Mark. He's different. Jake's tone shifts, more serious now. Different how? He's always working late, secretive with his phone, and there's this tension, like he's hiding something. Jake pauses, then says, "You think he's seeing someone else?" The words sting, even though I've thought them 1,000 times. I don't know, Jake. I just feel like I'm losing him. There's a resolve in Jake's voice when he speaks. Let me do something. I have a friend, a private detective. He can discreetly check on Mark, see what's up. I'm hesitant. A detective? Isn't that a bit much? Ava, if something's wrong, you need to know. For you and Lily. I sigh, a mix of relief and fear. Okay, do it. But, Jake, keep it quiet. I don't want to stir up more trouble if it's nothing. You got it. I'll take care of it, he assures me. Days pass, and each of Mark's late nights and hushed phone calls add to my growing unease. Then, one evening, Jake calls. Ava, I have some news. Can you meet me tomorrow? Just you? My heart sinks. Yes, I can make it. The next day, I sit across from Jake in a quiet cafe, the air thick with anticipation. So, what did you find out? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake hesitates, then hands me an envelope. Ava, it's not good. I open it to find photos and reports. There's Mark with a woman I don't recognize and a child. My world spins. He has a child? Jake nods solemnly. I'm sorry, Ava. The detective confirmed it. Mark's been living a double life. Tears blur my vision. How could he do this? To me? To Lily? Jake reaches across the table, his hand on mine. You're stronger than you know, Ava. We'll figure this out together. I nod, wiping away tears. I need to confront him, Jake. He has to explain this. Be careful, Ava. You don't know how he'll react. I have to know, Jake. I have to know why. Armed with the truth, but shattered inside, I head home. A confrontation is inevitable, and I need to brace myself for the storm that's about to hit. It's the evening of the dinner, and I'm Ava, preparing a meal that I know even my critical mother-in-law can't find fault with. The house is buzzing with a tense energy as I await the arrival of my brother, Jake. Tonight is about more than a family dinner. It's about unveiling a painful truth. As I set the table, I can feel the weight of the envelope in my pocket, heavy with the evidence of Mark's betrayal. My hands shake slightly, but I steady myself. This needs to be done. The dinner starts off like any other. Mark's parents, Helen and Frank, along with Mark, sit around the table, complimenting the food for a change. I catch Mark's eye, and he gives me a small, oblivious smile. It's almost time. Jake arrives, apologizing for being late. As he sits down, he casually turns to Mark. So, Mark, Ava told me about your investment ventures. Sounds interesting. Mark, caught off guard, coughs. Oh yeah, it's nothing big. I watch as Jake probes further. What kind of investments? Stocks? Real estate? Mark stumbles over his words. A bit of everything, really. I can see the confusion on Jake's face, feigned for the others, but all too real for me. Can you tell me more? I've been looking to invest myself? Mark fumbles, clearly out of his depth. It's complex stuff, hard to explain over dinner. That's my cue. I pull out the envelope and place it on the table, pushing it towards Mark. Maybe this will help explain, I say, my voice steady. Everyone's attention shifts to the envelope. Mark opens it, his face draining of color as he sees the photos, him with another woman and a child. Helen gasps, Mark, what is this? Frank looks on, stunned into silence. Mark tries to speak, but nothing coherent comes out. He looks at me, betrayal in his eyes. Ava, why? Why? You have a second family, Mark. How could you do this to us? So you moved your parents to my house, and with the money you received from renting their apartment, you kept your mistress? I'm almost yelling now, the pain and anger I've been holding back spilling over. The room is silent, the air thick with shock. Helen and Frank look between Mark and the photos, disbelief written all over their faces. You lied to us, to your own family, Helen whispers, her voice filled with hurt. Frank just shakes his head, unable to find words. Mark stands up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to explain, he says, but it's clear no explanation can undo this. He walks out of the room, and I'm left there with his parents in a deafening silence. The air in the house is thick with tension the morning after the revelation. I'm Ava, still reeling from the shock, but ready to face the consequences. Helen and Frank, Mark's parents, confront me in the kitchen, their faces twisted with anger. Helen's voice is sharp as a knife. You! This is your doing! You drove our son to this! I stare at her, disbelief and anger mixing in my gut. Me? Your son lied to all of us, Helen? Frank chimes in, his voice just as accusing. He was always a good boy until he married you. You must have pushed him away. My hands tremble with fury. I pushed him away. I cared for our family while he... Helen cuts me off. Oh, save it. You probably had men on the side too. That's why he did what he did. I've had enough. How dare you? I yell. I've been nothing but loyal and supportive, and you blame me for your son's betrayal? Frank steps closer, his face red. Our son would never have done this if it weren't for you. I take a step back, my heart pounding. You know what? I don't need to listen to this. This is my house and I want you out. Now. Helen scoffs. You can't kick us out. This is our son's house too. I stand my ground, firm and unwavering. No, Helen. This house was my grandmother's, and now it's mine. You have no right to be here after what you've said. Frank looks like he wants to argue, but Helen grabs his arm. Let's go, Frank. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted. As they pack their things, I feel a mix of relief and sadness. Once they're gone, I lock the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the empty house. Alone in the silence, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I look around the house, my house, and for the first time in a long while, I see a future where Lily and I can be free from lies and betrayal. I pick up the phone to call a locksmith. It's time to change the locks, to change our lives. The house feels different today, like a new chapter has just begun. I'm Ava, standing in my once troubled living room, now a space of peace and possibility. The legal battle is over, and the court's decision still echoes in my mind. I recall my lawyer's words from yesterday. The court has granted you substantial alimony and compensation for Mark's deceit and infidelity. He'll be paying for quite some time. I had felt a mix of relief and vindication hearing that. It wasn't about the money, it was about accountability. Lily, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world, plays on the floor. Her laughter is a balm to my soul. I watch her, thinking about our future. The phone rings, snapping me back to the present. It's Jake, checking in. Hey, Ava, how are you holding up? I smile. Better, Jake. Much better. The court's decision helped close a painful chapter. Jake's voice is warm. I'm glad, Ava. You deserve peace after all this. I glance at Lily. We both do. As I talk to Jake, I can't help but think about Mark. The last I heard, he was struggling to make ends meet, now living with his parents again. It's ironic, I say to Jake. He's back where he started, but this time by his own doing. Jake sighs. He brought it on himself, Ava. You did what you had to do. I nod, feeling a sense of closure. Mark's choices led him here, and I no longer feel any obligation to worry about him. After the call, I sit with Lily, watching her play. The court's decision has given us a financial cushion, but more importantly, it's given us freedom. Mommy, look! Lily holds up a drawing of our house. Our home, she says proudly. I hug her. Yes, sweetie, our happy home. I realize then that this is just the beginning for us. A beginning filled with hope, strength, and the love we have for each other. The road ahead is ours to shape, and I feel ready to embrace whatever comes our way, with Lily by my side.
My life, as I had come to know it, was nestled in a small but charming home filled with the laughter of my 2-year-old son, Leo, and the steady, reassuring presence of my husband, Michael. I was 31, a former career woman who had climbed the corporate ladder faster than most. My journey had begun in a large company where I first met Michael. He was a junior member of my team back then, bright and ambitious, but still finding his footing. Our story was not the typical office romance. I was his superior, a fact that made our initial interactions cautious and professional. I remember the first project we worked on together. His ideas were fresh, his approach unconventional. It intrigued me. After hours, we'd often find ourselves last to leave the office, our discussions spilling over from work to life, dreams, and aspirations. It was during one of these late evenings, under the dim lights of the empty office, that our relationship took a turn. Michael, with a hesitancy that was uncharacteristic, had asked me out for coffee. It's just coffee, as colleagues, he had said. but we both knew it was more. Fast forward through a year of discreet dates and stolen moments, we got married. It felt like a whirlwind, yet perfectly natural. Our wedding was a simple affair, just close friends and family. The highlight was when Michael, in his vows, promised not only to love and cherish me but to always respect and support my ambitions. When Leo came into our lives, everything changed. I made the decision to step away from my career to focus on our son. It wasn't an easy choice, but holding Leo for the first time, I knew it was what I wanted. Michael supported me through it all, his own career steadily advancing as he stepped into more prominent roles at work. Our home became a reflection of our new life. The walls, once lined with my various awards and accolades, now held family photos and Leo's artwork. The spare room, which was once my home office, transformed into a nursery, painted in soft pastels. Despite the joy and fulfillment motherhood brought, there were moments when I missed my career. I missed the challenges, the sense of achievement, and even the office politics. I often found myself reminiscing about my professional accomplishments, wondering what could have been if I had stayed. Michael, aware of my inner turmoil, would often encourage me to consider going back. "You were amazing at what you did, Anna. Leo's growing, and maybe it's time for you to reclaim that part of yourself," he would say. One such evening, as I was preparing dinner, Michael came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Have you thought more about going back to work?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned off the stove and leaned back into him. "I have, but I'm not sure, Michael. It's not just about me anymore. We have Leo to think about." He kissed the top of my head. "We'll figure it out together. We always do." The sun was just starting to set, casting a warm glow through the kitchen window as I prepared dinner. Leo was playing with his toys in the living room, occasionally letting out a cheerful laugh. It was a typical evening, or so I thought, until my phone rang, displaying a name I hadn't seen in a while, Mr. Thompson, my former boss. Curious, I answered, "Mr. Thompson? This is a surprise. How can I help you?" "Anna, good to hear your voice. I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone hinting at something important. "Oh, what kind of proposition?" I asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "We're looking for a new head of the department. Your name came up, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be interested in coming back?" Mr. Thompson's offer hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was momentarily speechless. I'm flattered, Mr. Thompson. But I need to think about it." "Of course, take your time. But remember, we'd love to have you back," he replied. As I hung up, my mind raced with possibilities. Returning to work, leading a department, it was a dream opportunity. But as Michael walked in, his face tired from a long day at work, I felt a pang of uncertainty. "Who was that on the phone?" Michael asked, peeling off his jacket. "It was Mr. Thompson. They want me back at work, as the head of the department," I said, trying to gauge his reaction. Michael's face hardened. "Head of the department? That's the position I've been eyeing. They promised me a shot at it." I was taken aback. "I didn't know you applied for it. Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't think it mattered. Besides, you're happy here, aren't you?" His words stung. "I am, but this is a huge opportunity for me. I can't just ignore it." Michael's expression softened slightly, but his stance was firm. "Anna, I need this promotion. It's not just about the money, it's about my career. I want you to call Mr. Thompson back and decline the offer." I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, disappointment, anger. "You want me to turn it down? Just like that?" "Yes, I do. It's important to me, Anna. Please," he pleaded. The room felt smaller as I processed his words. Michael's insistence felt like a betrayal, a dismissal of my aspirations. I realized then that our perfect life was more fragile than I had thought. The tension in the house was palpable since the phone call about the job. Michael, perhaps sensing the distance growing between us, started a new tradition, taking Leo out on weekend mornings, leaving me with a few precious hours to myself. On one such Saturday, as Michael was bundling Leo up in his little jacket, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. "You sure you want to do this every weekend?" "It's a lot of work, taking Leo out alone," I said, watching them by the door. Michael looked back at me, a determined look on his face. "I got this, Anna. You need a break. Besides, Leo loves our little adventures, don't you, buddy?" He ruffled Leo's hair, who giggled in response. As the door closed behind them, the house fell into a silence that felt both comforting and unsettling. I poured myself a coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the weight of my thoughts heavier than the mug in my hands. Hours later, when they returned, Michael had a victorious grin on his face. "We conquered the playground, didn't we, champ?" he said, helping Leo off with his shoes. Leo's face was flushed with excitement. "We saw a doggy, mommy. A big one." His innocent joy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile. "That sounds wonderful, honey," I said, bending down to give Leo a hug. I looked up at Michael, trying to read his expression. "Did you have fun too?" Michael nodded, a hint of something softer in his eyes. "Yeah, it was good. We should do this more. It's good for him. And for us." His words, simple as they were, hit me unexpectedly. It was an olive branch, a small step towards mending the rift that had formed between us. "Maybe I could join you next time," I suggested tentatively. He paused, then nodded. "Sure, that could be nice." As I watched them play in the living room, a sense of normalcy crept back into our home. The job offer still hung over us like a dark cloud, but in these moments, it felt like we could find our way back to each other. The weekend had unfolded in its usual rhythm. Michael had taken Leo out for their Saturday morning walk, a routine that had become their special father-son time. As I settled in with a cup of tea, I remembered the smartwatch I had secretly slipped onto Leo's wrist for safety. Michael didn't know about it. I thought it was better that way, just a small measure of reassurance for me. Casually, I opened the app on my phone to check their location, expecting to see them at the nearby park as usual. But the blinking dot on the map was nowhere near the park. It was several blocks away, in a residential area unfamiliar to me. My heart raced with confusion and concern. I dialed Michael's number, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hey, where are you guys? Leo wanted to show me something he found in the park, but we can't seem to find it." There was a brief pause before Michael replied, his voice too nonchalant. "We're just at the park, near the pond. Leo's having a blast feeding the ducks." His words didn't match the GPS location. I felt a knot in my stomach. "Sounds fun. See you when you get back," I said, ending the call. As I hung up, a flurry of questions invaded my thoughts. Why would Michael lie about their location? What was he hiding? I decided not to confront him about the smartwatch. I needed to know more, to understand what was happening before revealing my hand. The rest of the morning, I was restless, my mind spinning with possible explanations. When they returned home, Leo was his usual cheerful self, chattering about the ducks and the playground. Michael seemed relaxed, unaware of my inner turmoil. "How was the park?" I asked, watching Michael for any sign of discomfort. "It was great. A bit chilly, but we had fun, didn't we, buddy?" Michael responded, ruffling Leo's hair. Leo nodded eagerly, oblivious to the tension. "We saw big ducks, mommy. And a doggy." I forced a smile, playing along with their tails. "That sounds lovely. I'm glad you both had a good time." As the day went on, I couldn't shake off the unease. Michael's deception, however small it seemed, had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. What was he doing in that unknown neighborhood? Why lie about it? For a whole week, my mind buzzed like a beehive, disturbed and restless. Each time I glanced at Michael, a wave of questions and doubts washed over me. But I masked my turmoil, waiting for the weekend, waiting for a chance to unravel the truth behind Michael's mysterious outings with Leo. Saturday arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Michael, as per the new routine, got ready to take Leo out. I watched them, my heart a knot of anxiety and suspicion. "Have a great time," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are you guys heading today?" Michael, securing Leo in his stroller, looked up and replied with ease, "Thought we'd check out that new playground on the east side. Leo's been asking about it." After they left, I waited, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, counting the minutes. As soon as I saw their location veer off course on Leo's smartwatch app, my resolve hardened. I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to confront whatever lay at the end of that GPS trail. Driving to the location felt surreal, like I was a character in a bad movie. The neighborhood was unfamiliar, a stark contrast to our own. I parked a block away and approached the address on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was a modest, two-story building with a small, well-kept garden. Hiding my nervousness, I stood across the street, pretending to be interested in my phone. Soon, I saw them, Michael and Leo, approaching the house. The door opened, and a woman appeared. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with a bright smile. Michael pulled her to him, possessively, and they kissed. I watched, hidden behind my sunglasses. A part of me wanted to lash out at them, push them away from each other. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, proof of the betrayal. I returned to my car, my mind a whirlwind of emotion. The drive home was a blur, each mile stretching out endlessly. Back home, the house felt emptier, even with Leo's toys scattered around. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on my phone. Michael, my husband, the man I trusted, was kissing another woman. The images burned in my mind, a stark, painful reality that I couldn't escape. When they returned, Michael was in high spirits, regaling me with stories of their day, the playground, the ice cream they had, Leo's laughter. I listened, nodding and smiling, a hollow feeling growing inside me. "And how was the new playground?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. "It was great," Michael replied, unaware of my internal turmoil. Leo made a new friend, and they played on the slides for ages. Monday morning arrived with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in a long time. As I watched Leo play, a plan formed in my mind. It was time to reclaim a part of myself that I had put aside. Once Leo was settled with his toys, I stepped into the other room and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. My heart raced as the phone rang. "Mr. Thompson, it's Anna. I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept the position of department head," I said, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "That's fantastic news, Anna. We're thrilled to have you back on board," Mr. Thompson's voice boomed with enthusiasm. After the call, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. I had taken the first step towards a new chapter in my life, one where I wasn't just a wife and mother, but also the professional I used to be. The day passed slowly, the weight of the impending confrontation with Michael heavy on my mind. When he finally came home that evening, his mood was off. He slammed the door a bit harder than usual and threw his keys on the table. "Anna, we need to talk. Why did Thompson call me today saying you took the job? The job that was supposed to be mine?" His voice was laced with anger and disbelief. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I did take the job, Michael. It's time for me to get back to my career." "Your career? What about our agreement? What about our family?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Our family will be fine. This is about me, Michael. I need this." My words were firm, unyielding. Michael laughed bitterly. "You need this? What about what I need? What I've been working towards?" I stared at him, the betrayal and pain I had felt over the past weeks boiling to the surface. "What about what you've been doing, Michael? Behind my back?" His laughter stopped, replaced by a confused scowl. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken. "I know about her, Michael. I've seen you with her." His face paled as he looked at the photos, his anger dissolving into a mix of shock and guilt. "Anna, I can't explain. No, Michael. I don't want to hear it. Not now. I cut him off, my voice shaking with emotion. You've broken our trust, and now I need to focus on myself and Leo. The decision to file for divorce, though heart-wrenching, was driven by a deep sense of betrayal and the need for justice. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Michael's infidelity, I stood my ground in the courtroom, demanding appropriate compensation and alimony. Michael fought fiercely, contesting every claim, every penny, as if trying to salvage his pride. The legal battle was draining, emotionally and mentally. But I remained resolute, bolstered by the knowledge that I was fighting not just for myself, but for a fair future for Leo and me. The court, recognizing the weight of the evidence, ruled in my favor. It was a bittersweet victory. The repercussions of our publicized divorce extended beyond the personal to the professional. The scandal of Michael's affair, once private, became a public spectacle. It wasn't long before the company we both worked for was embroiled in the controversy. Unable to weather the storm, they let Michael go. I remember the day he confronted me about it. His anger was palpable, his words sharp with blame. "Are you happy now, Anna? I've lost my job because of this mess," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with bitterness. I met his gaze, my own resolve unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Michael. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences." He scoffed, shaking his head. "I can't believe how cold you've become. You're just sitting pretty while I have to scrounge for a lesser-paying job." His words stung, but I didn't let them sway me. "This isn't about revenge, Michael. It's about doing what's right. It's about justice for what you did to our family." Our relationship, post-divorce, was anything but amicable. Michael's resentment towards me only grew with each alimony payment, with every job application that led nowhere. And while I took no pleasure in his struggles, there was a part of me that felt vindicated. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Life after the divorce felt like walking on unfamiliar terrain. Each step was cautious, yet with every passing day, I grew more confident in my new role as a single mother and a professional woman reclaiming her career. One crisp morning, as I was getting Leo ready for school, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes. "Mommy, are you okay? You seem different." I knelt down to his level, brushing his hair back. "I'm more than okay, Leo. I'm strong, and we're going to be just fine." He smiled, that pure, innocent smile of a child. "I think you're like a superhero, Mommy. Like in my comics." I chuckled, hugging him close. "Well, every superhero needs a sidekick, right? How about you be mine?" Leo nodded enthusiastically, his laughter filling the room. It was moments like these that reminded me of the resilience and joy that still existed in our world, despite the shadows of the past. At work, I found myself diving into projects with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues noticed the change too. One day, my coworker, Jenna, commented on it during lunch. "You seem different, Anna. More, I don't know, alive?" Jenna observed, stirring her coffee. I smiled, sipping my tea. "I feel like I've finally woken up, Jenna. Like I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in a long time." Jenna smiled back. "Well, it suits you. Keep it up, boss lady." Life wasn't without its challenges, though. Michael and I had minimal contact, only speaking when necessary for Leo's sake. Our conversations were brief, to the point, and often tense. On one such occasion, as we discussed Leo's upcoming parent-teacher conference, Michael's frustration was evident. "I can't make it to the meeting, Anna. I have to work," he said curtly over the phone. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone neutral. "That's fine, Michael. I'll handle it. Leo's doing great in school, by the way." There was a pause. "Thanks, Anna. Let me know if there's anything really important." As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found solace in the small victories and joys of everyday life. Leo's laughter, the satisfaction of a job well done, the support of friends and family, these were the things that now defined my days. I realized that moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it, growing stronger because of it. It was about building a new life on my own terms, filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. As I looked at Leo, growing taller and more confident each day, I knew we were on the right path. Together, we were moving forward, stepping into a future that was ours to shape.
I remember sitting on our old, squeaky porch steps, the paint chipping off like it couldn't wait to leave, just like Dad. Mom used to say he had wheels under his feet and a heart too big for any map. I never really got what that meant until the police came that day, saying Dad's truck was found abandoned by the side of some forgotten highway. I was just 7, clinging to Mom's skirt, not really understanding but feeling the weight of her silent tears. Mom, Jane, was a fighter though. Without Dad, she took on double shifts at the local diner. I'd often fall asleep to the sound of her coming home late, trying to be quiet but never quite managing it. One evening, when I was about 12, I asked her, "Mom, why do you work so much? Aren't you tired?" She sat beside me, her eyes tired but kind. "Ella, we've got to make ends meet. Life's tough, but we're tougher, right?" I nodded, not fully understanding but proud to be tough like Mom. Then came the hammer blow that was Mom's cancer diagnosis when I was 18. She fought it, hard, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. She passed away quietly, leaving me with nothing but memories and a stack of bills. College was supposed to be my escape, my dream. I managed to scrape together enough for the first year, but after that, I was on my own. I juggled classes with 2, sometimes 3, jobs, anything that would pay. One particularly grueling night at the campus library, I remember breaking down. I was alone, surrounded by books that seemed as heavy as the world on my shoulders. That's when I first met John. He walked over, his eyes full of concern. "Hey, are you okay?" I wiped my eyes, embarrassed. "Yeah, just college stuff." He smiled, a little awkwardly. "I get it. I'm John, by the way." "Ella," I replied, managing a small smile. That's how it all started with John. He was different, kind, and always there, like a steady rock in my turbulent sea. He didn't have much, but he shared everything he had with me, half a sandwich, notes from classes, even his old, battered laptop. We'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the silence. It was comfortable, safe. I hadn't felt that way since Mom was around. "You know, Ella," John said one day, "you're the strongest person I know. You're going to make it, I'm sure of it." I laughed, a bit bitterly. "Strong? I feel like I'm barely hanging on." That's what being strong is about, isn't it? Hanging on, even when it's the last thing you want to do. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized he was right. I was strong, like Mom. And somehow, I knew I'd make it through, with or without wheels under my feet. College life wasn't anything like those fancy brochures. It was hard, gritty, and it tested you in ways you never thought possible. I remember my second year, standing in line at the financial aid office, my stomach in knots. The lady at the counter looked at me like I was just another number. "Next," she called out, not even looking up. "Hi, I'm here about my scholarship renewal." I began, but she cut me off. "If it's not renewed in the system, there's nothing I can do." "Next?" I walked away, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. That's when I bumped into John again. He was always popping up when I least expected it. "Hey, Ella, everything okay?" he asked, his brows furrowed with concern. I shook my head. "No, not really. Financial aid's a dead end. Looks like I might have to drop out." John was quiet for a moment. "That's rough. But hey, don't give up. You're smarter than half the professors here." I chuckled, despite the gloom. "Thanks, John. I just..." I don't know what to do. Come on, let's grab a coffee. My treat. You can tell me all about it. That coffee turned into many more. John became my go-to person at college. He had this way of making problems seem smaller, more manageable. We'd sit in the cafeteria, him with his endless optimism, me trying not to drown in my own worries. One day, he said, "You know, Ella, you should start looking for a job on campus. Might help with the money situation." I rolled my eyes. You think I haven't tried? It's like everyone's out to get me or something. John leaned in. Not everyone. I hear the library's looking for someone. You're always there anyway, might as well get paid for it. I thought about it. Maybe, but what if they say no? Then we find something else. You're not in this alone, Ella. That's how I ended up working at the library. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid some bills. Between stacking books and serving coffees at a local cafe, I barely had time for studies. But I was making it work, one day at a time. John and I grew closer. He wasn't just the guy who bought me coffee anymore. He was my friend, my confidant. He knew about my mom, my dad, and all the messy bits in between. It was one evening, while closing up the library, that John said something that stuck with me. Ella, you're going to make something of yourself. I just know it. And I'll be here, cheering you on. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. Thanks, John. That means a lot. College was tough, but with John by my side, it felt like I had a fighting chance. He was more than a friend, he was a reminder that some good still existed in this crazy, mixed-up world. After college, life took a turn I didn't expect. John and I got married. It wasn't some big fairy tale wedding, just a small courthouse do, with a few friends and less fanfare. We moved into this tiny apartment that had more cracks than walls, but it was ours. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter. Then came the problem. John's mom, Mrs. Smith. The woman was a piece of work. The first time she visited our place, her nose wrinkled like she'd walked into a dumpster. "This is where you live," she said, her voice dripping with something that was half disbelief, half disgust. I tried to smile. "Yeah, it's not much, but we're happy." She snorted. "Happy? John, you can do better than this. And what about kids? You can't raise kids in this. John cut in, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, we've talked about this. We're not rushing into kids. We're focusing on our careers right now." But she wouldn't have it. Every visit was a new complaint. The apartment's too small. The neighborhood's not good enough. Why isn't Ella cooking more? It went on and on. One evening, after she'd left, I turned to John, frustration boiling over. "Doesn't it bother you? The way your mom talks about our life?" John, ever the peacemaker, shrugged. "She's just worried about us. That's how she shows love, I guess." "That's not love, John. That's criticism. There's a difference." He didn't say much after that. It was like he couldn't see what was so clear to me. His mom's words were chipping away at us, bit by bit. Things got worse when she started hinting we should move somewhere better. I lost it one day. "John, we can't afford some fancy place." "Why doesn't she get that?" John looked uncomfortable. "She just wants the best for us, Ella. Maybe we could look at some other apartments, just to keep her quiet." "Keep her quiet? John, when are you going to stand up to her? We're married. This is our life, not hers." He didn't have an answer. That silence said more than any words could. So, we kept living our life, in our tiny apartment, with Mrs. Smith's disapproval hanging over us like a bad smell. I loved John, but his inability to stand up to his mom was driving a wedge between us. It was like he was still her little boy, not a grown man married and making his own way in the world. As time marched on, so did our lives, but in different directions. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and it was demanding as hell, but I loved it. I was climbing the ladder, making something of myself. John, on the other hand, was stuck in the same old job, a manager at a local retail store. He seemed okay with it, but I couldn't understand why he didn't want more. One night, I came home late, exhausted but buzzing from a successful project. John was on the couch, glued to some TV show. I flopped down beside him. You won't believe the day I had. We landed the big account. John grunted, "That's great, Ella." I frowned, looking for some enthusiasm. "Aren't you happy for me?" He turned, a bit annoyed. "Of course, I am. It's all you ever talk about. Work, work, work." I sat up, stung. "Well, sorry for being passionate about my career. What do you want me to do? Be like you, satisfied with just getting by?" He shot up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means, why don't you want more, John? Why are you content just being this?" He didn't answer, just stormed off to bed. I stayed on the couch, fuming and hurt. The tension spilled over into everything. Even simple conversations turned into minefields. Then came the day when John dropped a bombshell. He wanted us to move to a bigger place, something more befitting our status. I stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Befitting our status? "John, we can't afford a fancy place. We're doing fine here." He was insistent, "But we can't live like this forever, Ella. And my mom keeps saying." I cut him off. "Oh, so it's your mom again? When are you going to stop listening to her and start living for us?" John's face turned red. "I'm thinking about our future, Ella. Maybe you should too." That hurt. It felt like he didn't see all the hard work I was putting into building that future. It was like we were on different planets. In the end, we did move, to a house that cost us a whopping 12 grand a month. I could afford it, but it was a stretch. John seemed happier, but every time I wrote that rent check, I felt a part of me scream in protest. We were living in a house that was too big, with a gap between us that was growing wider. I lay awake most nights, wondering how we got here. Was it the money? The jobs? Or had we just changed too much? Just when I thought things couldn't get more strained between John and me, life threw a curveball. John's dad fell seriously ill. It hit John hard. They were close. Overnight, our already fragile routine got upended. One evening, after a particularly rough visit to the hospital, John slumped into a chair, looking like the world was on his shoulders. "Dad's not doing good, Ella. The doctors, they say he needs constant care." I sat beside him, trying to be the supportive wife. "I'm so sorry, John. Maybe we can get a nurse to help?" He shook his head, his eyes distant. "No, I've been thinking. I'm going to take care of him. I'll quit my job and move in for a while." I was stunned. "Quit your job? John, are you sure? What about our bills, the rent for this place?" He snapped, "This isn't about money, Ella. It's my dad. I need to be there for him." I understood, I really did, but the practical side of me was screaming. "And I get that, John, but we need to think this through. We can find another way to help your dad." He wouldn't budge. "No, my mind's made up. I'm doing this." So, he did. John moved into his parents' place, leaving me alone in our big, empty house. Days turned into weeks. I was juggling my job and all our bills, while he was. I don't even know what. Every time I called or visited, it was the same scene. John, either glued to his phone or the TV, looking exhausted and frustrated. His mom, Mrs. Smith, was always hovering, throwing in her 2 cents. One day, I found him sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand, eyes glued to some game. John, shouldn't you be with your dad? He barely glanced at me. He's sleeping. What do you want me to do, sit and stare at him? I bit back my frustration. You could look for a part-time job, help out with our expenses. That got his attention. He sat up, angry. Really, Ella? You want me to work now? While my dad's lying there dying? I tried to keep my voice steady. We're drowning in bills, John. I can't handle everything on my own. His mom walked in then, always perfect timing. Ella, John is doing a noble thing, taking care of his father. You should be grateful. Grateful? The word hit me like a slap. Grateful? I'm keeping our lives afloat while he sits here doing, what? Playing caretaker while watching TV and drinking? John stood up, towering over me. You just don't get it, do you? This is family. Maybe if you had one, you'd understand. That cut deep. Too deep. I walked out, the sound of his mom's tut-tuts chasing me. I drove home, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't the man I married. This was a stranger, living a life I didn't sign up for. The days after John's father passed were tough. I expected things might start to shift back to normal, but they never did. John never went back to work. Instead, he spent more and more time at his mom's place, leaving me alone in our big, expensive house, drowning in bills and loneliness. One evening, I came home from work to find John and his mother, Mrs. Smith, sitting in the living room. The air was thick with tension. I could tell something was up. Ella, we need to talk, John said, not even bothering to look at me. I set my bag down, feeling a knot in my stomach. What's going on? Mrs. Smith, who always had too much to say, started, We've decided it's best if John and I live here. We can take care of the rent now. I was shocked. What? This is our home, John. You can't just kick me out. John finally looked at me, his eyes cold. It's not working, Ella. You and me, this life. I need to start over, and Mom needs a place to stay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Start over? So, you're just going to throw away our marriage, just like that? He shrugged. It's been over for a while, hasn't it? We're just making it official now. I turned to his mother. And you think you can just come in here and take over my life? Mrs. Smith stood up, her voice sharp. It's for the best, Ella. You and John were never a good match. He needs to be with family now. I was seething. Family? What about me? I'm his wife. John stood up, facing me. Not anymore. We want you out, Ella. The sooner, the better. I looked between them, the betrayal cutting deep. Fine. I'll go. But don't think for a second that this is okay. You're both making a huge mistake. I packed a bag with my essentials, my hands shaking with rage and hurt. As I walked out the door, John's voice followed me. We're doing what needs to be done, Ella. You'll see, this is for the best. Settling into my new, modest apartment felt like a fresh start. It was small, but it was a place where I could finally breathe, away from the stifling atmosphere of my past life with John and his overbearing mother. The walls were bare, and the furniture was minimal, a stark contrast to the lavishness I'd left behind. As I was arranging my few belongings, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old mutual friend of John and me, Laura. Hey Ella, have you heard about John and his mom? They're living it up. Expensive clothes, fancy gadgets. Wonder where all that money's coming from? I stared at the screen, a mix of curiosity and bitterness swirling in me. Where were they getting the money? I thought back to the expensive house, the bills, and the lifestyle they had insisted on. It didn't add up. Shaking my head, I typed a quick reply, no idea, Laura. Good for them, I guess. But the question nagged at me. I couldn't help but wonder how they were affording such extravagance, especially after kicking me out and with John not working. A few days later, I ran into another friend, Mike, at the grocery store. He brought it up again. "Ella, you won't believe it. Saw John and his mom at the high-end electronics store. They were buying like there's no tomorrow. Heard they even sold their family home. Crazy, huh?" I forced a smile. Yeah, crazy. But inside, my mind was racing. They sold the family home? Was that where the money was coming from? As I unpacked groceries in my kitchen, a small, unadorned space that was now my refuge, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was moving on, building my life again from scratch, while they seemed to be living in a world of luxury built on, what? Lies? Deceit? I sat down at my tiny dining table, a second-hand purchase, and let out a long breath. It didn't matter, I told myself. I was out of that toxic environment, free from their twisted dynamics. But deep down, I knew the truth. It did bother me. It bothered me that they seemed to be thriving after throwing me to the curb. I had worked hard for everything I had, while they seemed to be enjoying a life of ease and comfort. As the evening wore on, I found solace in the quiet of my apartment. It was mine, earned through my own effort and resilience. I had lost much, but I had gained something more valuable, my independence, my sense of self. 4 months into my new life, the past came knocking in a way I never expected. My phone rang one lazy Saturday morning, the caller ID flashing John's name. I hesitated but answered. "Ella, we need your help." John's voice was shaky, desperate. I sat up, alert. "What's happened, John?" "It's all gone wrong. We got kicked out of the rental house. Mom and we have nowhere to go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Kicked out? But I thought you had money?" There was a pause, then, "The money's gone, Ella. Dad left debts, not inheritance." "We thought," his voice trailed off. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a tinge of satisfaction. Were they really posh all this time, hoping for a rich inheritance? Seriously? It was too much even for my ex-husband. "So, what do you want from me, John? We were wondering if, maybe we could stay with you, just for a while, until we sort things out." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You want to stay with me? After everything?" John's voice was pleading now. "Please, Ella. We have nowhere else to go. Remember the good times, can't we just?" I cut him off. "Good times? John, you and your mother threw me out of my own home. You can't just come crawling back now that things are tough." He was silent for a moment, then, "I know I messed up, Ella. I'm sorry. We're just really desperate." I took a deep breath, my decision clear. "John, I've moved on. I've built a new life, and there's no place for you or your mother in it. You need to figure this out on your own." "But Ella..." "No, John. It's over. You made your choice, now live with it." I hung up, my heart pounding. I felt a surge of empowerment, mixed with a twinge of sadness. John, the man I once loved, was now just a voice on the other end of the phone, a reminder of a life I had left behind. Later, Laura called me. I heard about John and his mom. "Are you okay?" I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "Yeah, I'm more than okay. I'm free, Laura. Truly free." As I ended the call, I looked around my small apartment, my sanctuary. It was a far cry from the life I had with John, but it was real, it was mine. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. That night, I realized that this was my new beginning. A life where I was in control, where my happiness didn't depend on someone else. I had lost much, but in the process, I had found myself.
My name is Claire. At 29, I'm a chef at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. Cooking is my passion, my art. But let me tell you, my life isn't just about perfecting recipes. It's also about dealing with a recipe for disaster, namely, my mother-in-law, Margaret. I met Alex, my husband, in a way most people do these days, online. We clicked instantly. He was charming, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We married within a year, a small ceremony but filled with love. That's when Margaret entered the picture, and let's just say, she wasn't the typical doting mom. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first met her. Alex had arranged a dinner at our place. I remember being nervous, wanting to impress her. "Mom, this is Claire. She's an amazing chef," Alex had introduced me with pride in his voice. Margaret, a tall woman with sharp features, had looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my apron like it was a piece of alien clothing. "A chef, huh? I hope you can cook something more refined than diner food." I had chuckled, nervously. "I'll do my best to impress you." Dinner was my arena, and I had put my heart into it. The table was set with my best dishes, herb-crusted lamb, a delicate risotto, and a chocolate mousse to die for. Margaret had poked at her food, a frown forming as she tasted each dish. "Well, it's edible, I suppose. Not what we're used to, but it'll do." Alex had shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. That was Alex, always avoiding confrontation, especially with his mother. After dinner, as I was clearing the table, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. "Claire, dear, I hope you understand that Alex comes from a refined family. We have certain standards." I had nodded, trying to keep my cool. "I understand, Mrs. Thompson. I'll keep that in mind." She had sniffed, her gaze cold and calculating. "See that you do. My son deserves the best." That night, as Alex and I lay in bed, I turned to him. "Your mother is quite something." He had sighed, pulling me close. "She's always been like that. But don't worry, we'll manage." Manage, I thought. If only I had known then how much of an understatement that would be. It was a busy Friday night at the restaurant. The kind of night where the kitchen is a whirlwind of activity, and I'm in my element, orchestrating the chaos. That's when Margaret decided to grace us with her presence, unannounced. I was plating a delicate salmon dish when I saw her sweeping through the dining area, like she owned the place. She had that look on her face, the kind that spelled trouble. My heart sank. I watched from the kitchen as she settled at a prime table, snapping her fingers for service. I wiped my hands on my apron, bracing myself for the inevitable. Emerging from the kitchen, I approached her table with a cautious smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. What a surprise! What can I get for you tonight?" She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Oh, Claire, darling. I thought I'd try your little restaurant. Bring me your best dishes. Spare no expense." I nodded, my mind racing. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson." The orders were extravagant: caviar, truffle pasta, the most expensive wine. As I prepared her dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When the bill arrived at her table, Margaret glanced at it, then waved it away. "Oh, I won't be needing this. Put it on Claire's tab. She's family, after all." My head chef, who had delivered the bill, came back to me with a puzzled look. "Claire, she says you're covering her bill." I felt a knot in my stomach. "Did she now?" I muttered, clenching my fists. I walked back to her table, the bill in hand. "Mrs. Thompson, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is a business, and..." Margaret cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, Claire. You can afford a little generosity for your family. It's the least you can do." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson, this is highly irregular. But she was already standing, her coat draped over her arm. "Don't make a scene, dear. It's unbecoming. Just take care of it. And with that, she left, leaving me with a bill that could pay my rent twice over. How could she? How could she just walk in and expect me to foot the bill for her extravagance? I felt used, cornered. And worst of all, I felt alone in this. Alex would just tell me to let it go, to keep the peace. But peace, I realized, came at a price. A price I was no longer sure I was willing to pay. Holidays. A time for family, laughter, and good food. Well, in my world, it meant one thing, cooking up a storm for Margaret's never-ending guest list and dealing with her endless demands. It was Thanksgiving, and as usual, Margaret had decided to host it at our place. After all, Claire, you have the space, and you're such a good cook, she had said on the phone, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen, buried under a mountain of groceries that I had paid for, of course. The menu was a laundry list of Margaret's favorites, no regard for what I or anyone else liked. As I was peeling potatoes, Alex walked in, looking sheepish. "Babe," Mom called. "She wants to add a few more dishes. Some relatives just RSVP'd." I looked at him, my hands covered in potato skins. "More dishes? Alex, I'm already swamped here." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I know, but you know how she is. It's just a few more people." "Just a few more people," I muttered. It was always just a few more people. The day of Thanksgiving was a blur. I cooked and cooked, the kitchen a battleground. When the guests started arriving, I was still in my apron, a whirlwind of pots and pans. Margaret swept into the kitchen, her nose in the air. "Claire, dear, do make sure everything is perfect. We have some very important guests." I forced a smile. "Everything's under control, Mrs. Thompson." The dinner was a hit, or so it seemed. I barely had time to sit down, let alone eat. Margaret played the gracious host, basking in the compliments, as if she had slaved over the stove all day. After the guests had left, I was clearing up, my back aching, my feet sore. That's when Margaret decided to give her feedback. "Claire, the turkey was a tad dry, and the cranberry sauce too tart. And really, dear, you could have dressed up a bit. You looked like a maid amongst the guests." I clenched my jaw, holding back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. "I'll keep that in mind for next time, Mrs. Thompson." Alex, who had been silent all evening, finally spoke up. "Mom, Claire worked hard. It was a great dinner." Margaret sniffed. "Hard work is expected, Alexander. No need for praise. Good night." As I watched her leave, I wondered why I was putting up with this. Why I was allowing myself to be treated like a doormat, my efforts dismissed, my feelings ignored. Alex put an arm around me. "Don't take it to heart, babe. Let's just go to bed." I nodded, too tired to argue. But inside, a storm was brewing. Something had to change, and soon. I never thought I'd be grateful for getting sick, but when I caught the flu right before Christmas, it felt like a twisted sort of blessing. Maybe now I'd get a break from Margaret's demands. Or so I thought. I was curled up on the couch, buried under blankets, a mountain of used tissues beside me. That's when my phone rang. It was Margaret, of course. "Claire, dear, you do remember Christmas is at our place this year. You'll be cooking, won't you?" Her voice was as cold as the winter outside. I croaked into the phone, "Margaret, I'm really sick. I don't think I can." She cut me off, her tone icy. "Sick? Convenient timing, I must say. We're counting on you, Claire. Don't be selfish." Selfish? I couldn't believe my ears. "Margaret, I can barely stand up. I'm contagious." There was a pause, then a huff. "Fine. We'll manage somehow. Don't expect us to be sympathetic." The call ended, and I was left staring at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Later that day, Alex came home, his face tense. Mom called me. She's really upset, Claire. She thinks you're faking it. Faking it? I sat up, the room spinning a bit. Alex, look at me. Do I look like I'm faking? He sat beside me, his expression softening. No, you look terrible. But you know how Mom is. She's stressed about Christmas. Stressed? What about me? Sick, exhausted, and now accused of lying. Alex, I need you to understand. I'm really sick. I can't cook for Christmas. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'll talk to her. Just rest, okay? Rest. Right. As if I could rest with Margaret's words echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of fever, chills, and restless sleep. Miraculously, I started feeling a bit better just before Christmas. Not great, but no longer on death's door. I told Alex, hoping for some understanding. Instead, he said, "That's great, babe. So you can make it to Mom's for Christmas, right?" I stared at him, my heart sinking. Alex, I'm still weak. I can't cook for everyone. He looked disappointed, almost hurt. But it's Christmas, Claire. Mom's expecting us. Can't you just make a small effort? Small effort? I was fighting to get out of bed, and he wanted a Christmas feast. No, Alex. I can't, and I won't. My voice was firm, a hint of the frustration I'd been bottling up coming through. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. As Christmas Eve approached, I was still reeling from the flu. There was no way I could cook an entire feast. I decided to take a stand. I won't be able to cook for Christmas, but I'll order dishes from the restaurant, I told Alex, my voice firm. He looked at me, puzzled. What? But Mom's expecting you to cook, like always. I shook my head. I can't, Alex. I'm still weak. She'll have to deal with it. He sighed, a look of resignation on his face. Okay, I'll tell her. Later, when Alex relayed the message to Margaret over the phone, I could hear her shrill voice from across the room. Order food? That's her solution? Fine, but she'd better not expect me to cook. Christmas Eve arrived, and the delivery man from my restaurant showed up with the food. Margaret was there to meet him, signing the delivery papers without so much as a glance. Little did she know what she was actually agreeing to. As we gathered for dinner, I could feel Margaret's eyes burning into me. Too lazy to cook, Claire? Taking the easy way out, I see. Her words stung, but I bit back a retort. Alex was silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. Throughout dinner, Margaret's comments flew fast and furious. Can't even cook a meal for her family. What kind of wife are you, Claire? I clenched my fists under the table, my patience wearing thin. Alex didn't say a word, his silence a heavy presence at the table. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, Margaret cornered me. You've outdone yourself with laziness this year, Claire. Can't even cook a simple Christmas dinner. I turned to her, my voice low but fierce. I was sick, Margaret. I did what I could. She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. Sick? Looks more like laziness to me. You've just taken the easy way out. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. I'm not your personal chef, Margaret. I'm not here to bend over backward for you. Her eyes widened in shock, and used to being spoken back to. But I was past caring. Alex finally spoke up, his voice weak. Mom, Claire's right. She was sick. But Margaret brushed him off, her gaze still fixed on me. You've made your point, Claire. Don't expect any sympathy from me. As all the guests gathered in the living room, I stood up, the eyes of the guests curiously fixed on me. A sly smile played on my lips, a sense of retribution fueling my courage. Before everyone leaves, I have something to say, I announced, my voice steady, yet loud enough to cut through the post-dinner chatter. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. What now, Claire? Another one of your excuses? No, Mrs. Thompson. It's about the dinner tonight, I replied, my satisfaction growing. You owe $5,000 for it. A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret's face transitioned from smugness to shock. Excuse me? $5,000? For what? I held up the invoice, detailing every item. For everything, the groceries, chef's labor, delivery. All of it. Her voice escalated, piercing the shocked silence. This is absurd. I will not pay for your incompetence. But you already agreed to, Mrs. Thompson, when you signed for the delivery, I countered, feeling a surge of power. She sputtered in disbelief. I signed for the delivery, not for this outrageous bill. From my folder, I produced the signed delivery papers. Unfortunately, you did. It's all legally binding. Alex, my husband, who had been a silent spectator, finally interjected, his voice laced with unease. Claire, isn't this a bit much? Margaret turned to him, her eyes alight with vindication. See, even your husband knows you're being unreasonable. I faced Alex, my resolve unwavering. It's not unreasonable, Alex. Your mother needs to understand the cost of her demands. Margaret stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I will not be swindled by you. One of the guests, an elderly aunt, spoke up tentatively. Margaret, dear, if you signed it, it does seem fair to honor it. Margaret shot her a withering look. Fair? This is daylight robbery. Alex tried to calm the waters. Mom, let's discuss this rationally. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Margaret shrieked. Claire is exploiting us. I interjected, my patience fraying. Exploiting? I'm asking to be paid for professional services, Mrs. Thompson. The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, the tension almost tangible. Margaret's gaze was venomous. This is a declaration of war, Claire. You will pay for this. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I'm standing up for myself, Mrs. Thompson. That's all. As she stormed out of the room, the guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Alex approached me, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. Claire, why did you have to do this? In front of everyone. I looked at him, a sense of finality settling in my heart. Because, Alex, it was time. Time to show that I won't be pushed around anymore. Not even by your mother. The guests began to disperse, the mood somber, the festive spirit lost. I knew this was a turning point, a moment that would define the future of my relationship with Margaret and maybe even with Alex. The morning after the Christmas debacle was a battleground in our kitchen. The air was thick with resentment and unsaid words. Alex had obviously talked to his mother before, broke the silence with a voice sharpened by anger. You humiliated my mother, Claire. In front of everyone. How could you? I slammed my coffee cup down, my patience frayed to its limits. Humiliated her? Alex, she's been walking all over me for years. When will you see that? He glared at me, his words cutting through the air. She's my mother, Claire. She was just being herself. You didn't have to go and make a scene. I stood up, my own anger rising. Being herself? You mean being overbearing, insulting, and downright disrespectful? And you never did a thing to stop her. He scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? She's always right, Claire. You just don't understand her. I stared at him in disbelief. Always right? Even when she treats me like dirt? Is that what you really think, Alex? He didn't back down. Yes, I do. She's my mother. She comes first. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me snap. First? What about your wife, Alex? Where do I come in your life? He didn't answer, just gave me a cold, hard look. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. You know what, Alex? I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. His face went from anger to shock. Divorce? You're going to throw away our marriage over this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, Alex. I'm saving myself. From your mother, and from a husband who won't stand up for his wife. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he just stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, a mix of anger, relief, and sadness swirling inside me. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. The chasm between us had grown too wide to bridge. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. Months had passed since I filed for divorce. The world I once knew had crumbled, but from its ashes, I was building something new, something that was mine. I found myself in the kitchen of my apartment, the morning sun casting a warm glow on the walls. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, a comforting presence in my newfound solitude. My phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. It was my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Claire. How are you holding up? Her voice was filled with concern. I took a sip of my coffee, a smile touching my lips. I'm good, Lisa. Really, I am. I feel free. She chuckled. That's great to hear. You sound better. I leaned against the counter. I am better. I'm focusing on myself now, my career. I'm rediscovering who I am, without Alex, without Margaret. There was a pause, and then she said, I'm proud of you, Claire. You're doing what's best for you. I sighed, a sense of contentment washing over me. Yeah, it's been tough, but I feel stronger, you know? I'm finally standing up for myself. Lisa's voice brightened. Speaking of standing up for yourself, how's the restaurant doing? I glanced out the window, a sense of determination building within me. It's going great. I've been creating new dishes, experimenting. I feel alive in the kitchen again. That's the Claire I know, Lisa said, her voice warm with affection. Hey, why don't you come over tonight? Cook us one of your amazing dishes, and we can catch up. I laughed, the sound light and genuine. I'd love that, Lisa. It'll be nice to cook for friends again. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen, a space that was once a battlefield of marital disputes and now a sanctuary of my independence. I picked up a photo from the counter, one of me and Alex in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the good times, the love that once was. Then, with a deep breath, I put the photo away in a drawer. It was part of my past, a chapter that had closed. As I prepared for the day, I felt a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. The divorce had been a difficult journey, but it was also a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. That evening, as I cooked in Lisa's kitchen, laughter and chatter filling the room, I realized this was what happiness felt like. No pretense, no pressure, just me being me. As we sat down to eat, Lisa raised her glass. To new beginnings, Claire. I raised mine, a smile spreading across my face. To new beginnings. I remember that day clearly. It was a sunny Tuesday when I was about to meet Mark's parents for the first time. I was nervous but excited. Mark and I had been dating for 2 years, and he had finally popped the question. I had heard a lot about his parents, but we'd never met. Mark had always described his parents as traditional and a bit old-fashioned. I guess I didn't realize what that meant until I met them. We decided to meet at a local cafe. I arrived first, wearing my favorite blue dress, hoping to make a good impression. Mark arrived with his parents. His mom, Mrs. Thompson, wore a stern look and his dad, Mr. Thompson, seemed uninterested in everything around him. "Kate, these are my parents, John and Margaret Thompson," Mark introduced us. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I said with a smile. "Likewise," Mrs. Thompson replied, scanning me from head to toe. "Mark tells us you're a lawyer. Where do you work?" I was taken aback by her directness but managed to reply, "At Johnson and Partners, downtown." "And your salary? Must be good, being a lawyer and all," Mr. Thompson chimed in, his tone blunt. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's adequate for my needs," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And where do you plan to live after the wedding?" I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd step in, but he just shrugged. "We're still discussing that," I said. "And your parents, what do they do?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice almost demanding. "They run a small business," I replied, growing uncomfortable with the interrogation. Mrs. Thompson snorted. "Small business, huh? Let's hope they can contribute decently to the wedding." I felt a knot in my stomach. Mark noticed my discomfort but said nothing. As we ordered, Mrs. Thompson kept making side comments about the prices, and Mr. Thompson kept nodding in agreement. The whole meeting felt more like a business transaction than a family gathering. I remember thinking, is this what my future looks like? I tried to shrug off the feeling, telling myself it was just first meeting jitters. But deep down, I knew this was a red flag I couldn't ignore. It didn't take long after that first meeting for Mark's parents to become a constant, unsettling presence in my life. Their calls would come at any hour, disrupting my daily routine. Each ring of the phone started to feel like an intrusion. One evening, just as I was about to leave my office, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Kate, dear, I need you to look over some legal papers for us." "It's just a small favor," she said, her voice laced with expectation. I sighed, feeling the weight of her request. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm actually just heading out from work. Can it wait?" "Oh, it's just a quick look." "You can do it, can't you? For family," she pressed. I agreed reluctantly, knowing this was becoming a pattern. The next day, Mr. Thompson called. "Kate, I need help with setting up a new TV. Mark's busy, can you swing by?" Their requests were becoming more frequent and more demanding. I tried talking to Mark about it. "Mark, your parents are calling me all the time. For legal advice, for tech support, for everything," I said, hoping he'd understand. "They're just being friendly, Kate." "They're like that with everyone," Mark replied casually, brushing off my concerns. "But it's too much. They're calling me at work, at odd hours." "I'm feeling overwhelmed," I insisted. "Come on, Kate. They're harmless. Just trying to bond with you," he said, not meeting my eyes. I felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. It was as if Mark was completely blind to his parents' overbearing behavior. One evening, as we were having dinner at my place, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, again. "Kate, can you come over tomorrow? I need some advice on redecorating the living room." "You have such good taste," she said. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm not really an interior designer." I started, but she cut me off. "But you have such a lovely home. I insist." "We'll have lunch," she said, making it sound more like a command than a request. I hung up, feeling trapped. Mark just shrugged and said, "See? They really like you." But to me, it felt more like they were taking advantage of me, and Mark's indifference was only making it worse. I started to wonder if this was what my future with Mark would be like, constantly being at the beck and call of his parents, with no support from him. It was a Friday evening when Mark suggested we go out for dinner with his parents. He chose a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind where you'd think twice before checking the prices on the menu. I had a hunch it wouldn't be a casual, relaxing dinner, and boy, was I right. We arrived at the restaurant, and the Thompsons were already there, scanning the menu. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up when she saw the lobster and steak options. "Kate, you simply must try the lobster here. It's divine!" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. I glanced at the menu and saw the price. It was more than I wanted to spend, but before I could respond, Mr. Thompson chimed in. "Mark told us you're doing well at your firm. Surely, a successful lawyer like you can afford a little splurge now and then," he said, his tone a bit too pointed. Feeling cornered, I smiled weakly and said, "Actually, I was thinking of something lighter, maybe a salad." Mrs. Thompson looked at me as if I had suggested something outrageous. "A salad? Nonsense, you're at one of the best restaurants in town. You must try their specialties." I felt uncomfortable, but decided not to argue. I didn't want to cause a scene. As we were eating, the conversation revolved around Mark and his achievements, with his parents occasionally throwing in a question or two about my work, but not really listening to my answers. Then came the moment of truth, the bill. Mr. Thompson patted his pockets and then looked at his wife with a feigned expression of surprise. "Oh dear, I think I left my wallet at home," he said, his voice a little too calm for someone who'd just dined lavishly on someone else's dime. Mrs. Thompson joined in the charade. "John, how could you be so forgetful? I don't have mine either." I looked at Mark, expecting him to step in, but he just shrugged and mumbled, "I guess I forgot my card too." I couldn't believe it. Were they serious? It was clear this wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt more like a setup. With a sinking feeling, I pulled out my card and handed it to the waiter. Mrs. Thompson smiled sweetly at me. "Thank you, dear. You're such a lifesaver." As we left the restaurant, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Was I just a walking wallet to them? And why didn't Mark say anything? With the wedding drawing nearer, it became increasingly clear that it was time for our parents to meet. Given all my experiences with Mark's parents, I was bracing myself for this encounter. I remember pacing in my living room, phone in hand, rehearsing how I'd break the news to my parents. I finally mustered the courage and called them. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I think it's time you met Mark's parents," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Kate, we've been so excited about this. When can we meet them?" Mom's voice was a mix of enthusiasm and curiosity. I took a deep breath before adding a cautious note. "Just to give you a heads up, they're a bit, well, intense." Dad's voice came through with a chuckle. "Kate, we've seen all sorts in our days. Don't you worry, we'll manage." His confidence was comforting, but I couldn't shake off my apprehensions. We decided the Grandview Hotel, known for its pleasant ambience and beautiful surroundings. It was a familiar place to me, which I hoped would provide a distraction if things got too intense. The next day, I mentioned the plan to Mark over breakfast. "So, we're meeting at the Grandview Hotel this Saturday. I think it'll be nice for our parents to meet in a neutral, relaxed setting." Mark nodded, absorbed in his phone. "Sure, sounds good. I'll let my folks know." I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparation. I wanted to ensure that everything was perfect, hoping it would help keep the peace. As the day grew closer, my nerves began to fray. I found myself obsessing over every little detail, from what I would wear to how I would steer the conversation away from any potentially sensitive topics. On the eve of the meeting, I lay awake, scenarios running through my head. What if Mark's parents said something offensive? What if my parents didn't like them? What if the whole lunch turned into a disaster? The morning of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I chose a simple but elegant dress, hoping to strike the right balance between casual and formal. Mark, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed by the significance of the day. "It's just lunch, Kate. Everything will be fine," he said nonchalantly as he got dressed. His calmness did little to soothe my anxiety. If anything, it made me feel more alone in my concerns. I wondered if he truly understood how his parents' behavior had been affecting me, or if he was just choosing to ignore it. As we drove to the hotel, I went over the plan in my head. Keep the conversation light, avoid controversial topics, and try to ensure everyone gets along. Simple, right? The Grandview Hotel looked stunning as always, its elegant facade basking in the afternoon sun. As Mark and I walked into the lobby, my stomach was doing somersaults. I spotted my parents first, sitting in the lounge area. They stood up as we approached, smiles on their faces. "Kate, dear, you look wonderful," my mom said, giving me a reassuring hug. Dad gave me a firm, supportive pat on the back. Mark's parents arrived shortly after. The air seemed to change as soon as they walked in. Mrs. Thompson's eyes scanned the lobby like she was assessing the value of every item. "Nice place you've chosen, Kate," Mr. Thompson commented dryly, as he shook hands with my parents. "We thought it'd be a lovely spot for everyone to get together," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. We moved to the dining area, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. A hotel employee approached us with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry, but we're a bit overbooked today. We only have a few single rooms and 2 triple rooms available," he explained. "One of the triple rooms is our finest suite, with all amenities. The other is more basic and close to the road, so it can be a bit noisy," he added. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Thompson jumped in. "Well, obviously, John, Mark, and I will take the suite. Kate, you can cover the cost, right? After all, you organized this meeting." I was taken aback by her audacity. Well, I was thinking my parents and I could take the suite, But Mrs. Thompson cut me off. "Nonsense. We're the guests. And besides, you're the one with the big lawyer salary." My dad, trying to defuse the situation, suggested, "Why don't we discuss this over lunch and decide afterward?" Lunch was a tense affair. Conversation was forced, and I noticed Mark's parents sizing up my folks, their comments edged with subtle digs. My parents, to their credit, kept their cool, responding with grace and humor. As we neared the end of the meal, the room topic resurfaced. Mrs. Thompson was adamant. "We should get the suite. It's only proper. Kate can afford it." Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Mom's right. It's important they're comfortable." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really siding with them over this? My mom, ever the peacemaker, suggested, "Why don't we let the hotel decide? They can assign rooms based on availability." But Mrs. Thompson wouldn't have it. "Kate said you have a small business. I think you're not used to luxury. The simplest room should suit you. It is just designed for people with small incomes." The tension was palpable. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about rooms, it was about respect, something Mark's parents seemed to have little of, especially for me and my family. As the tension in the hotel lobby mounted, my father, George, cleared his throat and stepped forward, commanding everyone's attention. "There's something you all should know," he said, his voice calm and assertive. Mark, his parents, and I all looked at him, curious and a bit confused. "This hotel," Dad continued, along with several others across the country, "belongs to our family business." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mrs. Thompson's mouth dropped open, and Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in shock. Mark turned to me, his face a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You own this hotel?" Mrs. Thompson finally managed to sputter out. "Yes, and a few more," Dad replied casually. "We've always preferred to keep a low profile." The hotel employee, recognizing my father, suddenly seemed very flustered. "Mr. Williams, I apologize for the inconvenience earlier. I had no idea." Dad dismissed his concerns with a wave. "It's fine. But we will be taking the suite, and Mark's family can have the other room. And there's no need for Kate to pay." Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson's demeanor shifted dramatically. She became excessively flattering, her tone oozing with a newfound affection. "George, Linda, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea. You must be so proud of your accomplishments." Mark, who had been silent until now, turned to me, an eager look in his eyes. "Kate, this is incredible. We should move up our wedding date, don't you think?" I looked around at their changed faces, the forced smiles, the sycophantic attitudes. It was all too much, too fake. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. "Actually, Mark, there won't be a wedding. I'm calling off the engagement." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, Mr. Thompson looked stunned, and Mark was speechless. "I can't be a part of a family that only values people for their wealth and status," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the pretense, the expectations, and a future that no longer felt right for me. As I walked away from the hotel, my heart pounding and my mind racing, I heard Mark's footsteps hurrying after me. "Kate, wait, please. Let's talk about this," he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I stopped and turned to face him, feeling a surge of determination. "What is there to talk about, Mark? Your parents' behavior? Your indifference?" Before Mark could reply, Mrs. Thompson stormed up to us, her face red with anger. "Ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you," she spat out, her words laced with venom. I stared at her in disbelief. "Done for me? You've done nothing but disrespect me and my family." Mrs. Thompson's tirade continued, her words becoming more hurtful. "Stupid girl. You and your parents think you're better than us, don't you?" Mark looked torn between us, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. It was then that my father, George, stepped in. His voice was calm but carried an authority that stopped Mrs. Thompson in her tracks. "I think it's time for you to leave our hotel," he said firmly. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. "We're not going anywhere. You can't make us." Dad turned to the hotel staff. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Thompson out. They are no longer welcome here." The staff moved in, politely but firmly guiding Mark's parents away. Mrs. Thompson was still hurling insults over her shoulder as they left. Mark looked at me, a mix of confusion and regret in his eyes. "Kate, I'm sorry, I didn't expect." But I cut him off. "It's too late for sorry, Mark. Your silence said everything I needed to know." With those final words, I walked away from him, the sound of his mother's angry voice fading into the background. I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. It hurt to end things with Mark, but I knew it was the right decision. As I drove home, the weight of the day's events began to sink in. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. A chapter where I stood up for myself and refused to settle for anything less than what I deserved. The days following the breakup were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between relief, sadness, and a newfound sense of freedom. The decision to end my engagement with Mark, though painful, felt like the first step towards a future where I respected my own worth. One evening, as I sat on my porch, my mom called. "Kate, how are you holding up, sweetheart?" Her voice was full of concern. I took a deep breath, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I'm doing okay, Mom. It's been hard, but I feel like it was the right decision." "You're stronger than you realize, Kate. And we're so proud of you," she said warmly. I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for my supportive family. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you and Dad." There was a brief pause before she spoke again. "You know, sometimes the end of one thing is just the start of something new. Something better." Her words struck a chord in me. "You're right, Mom. This is a chance for a new beginning." In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work and spent time with friends who had been my pillars of strength. Their support was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. One weekend, while having lunch with my best friend, Sarah, she said, "You know, Kate, I think you did something many wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, stirring my coffee. It was tough, but I realized I have to be true to myself. I can't be in a relationship where I'm not valued. Sarah smiled, raising her glass. To new beginnings and self-respect. May this be the start of something wonderful for you. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of optimism about the future. In the weeks that followed, I found a new sense of independence. I explored hobbies I'd put on the back burner and even started planning a solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. Life after Mark was different, but it was empowering. I realized that being on my own wasn't something to fear, but an opportunity to discover myself and what I truly wanted in life. As I packed my bags for the trip, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was my journey, my path to discovering who I was outside of a relationship. I was moving forward, not with bitterness, but with hope and an open heart, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.